There's almost nothing as satisfying as having two antagonists go up against each other, and that's what I have for you today, my Gooners. So welcome. Today I pin up Waltz against the Baron, and I know the answer might seem obvious at first. However, to truly determine who is stronger, we need to consider everything. This video will not only pin up both characters against each other, but it'll also pin up their groups. The fights will be broken down into smaller sections. First, we'll see how both their groups would deal with each other if they suddenly came across one another. Now, of course, we're going to have to use our imaginations for this because the possibilities of both groups ever coming across each other is highly improbable. The next category, we'll see how both groups deal with attacking the other group. And then finally, for the final fight, we'll see who wins between Waltz and the Baron. Videos like this, however, are highly biased and based on opinions. So I'll do my best to use facts and feats from both games to give a fair trial. But of course you might have a different opinion than that of my own, which is totally fine. Just let us know who you think is stronger and give some evidence to back your claims in the comments. And for videos like this, we must first begin in the beginning, so let's go over their histories and powers. So strap in, and if you want to skip this part and go straight into the fights, then head to the timestamp below. We begin with the first antagonist, Waltz. Waltz worked with the GRE before being terminated. They had discovered to achieve his goals of creating the perfect bioweapon and a cure he had chosen to experiment on children. Whatever these experiments were, it was so bad that even the GRE, the ones responsible for the fall, decided to cut him loose. But unfortunately for him, his daughter would become infected during this time. So there was no other option but to continue experimenting. Somewhere around this time, he would meet the Colonel and they would join forces. He would continue the experiments on some of the Renegades and himself. He would eventually betray the Colonel and convince a bunch of Renegades to leave with him. His main goal was to gain access to the X-13 facility because within it, he could have the means to create a cure for his daughter. So what about the Renegades? Well, we know there are two factions within this group. We have the Renegades who defected to Waltz's side, and then the ones who stayed under the command of the Colonel. So what's the difference? Basically, most of the renegades seen in Villador and just in general are working under Waltz. The main force for the Colonel tends to stay in the water pumping station. Now, this doesn't mean they can't be found elsewhere. It does appear Waltz ended up taking the bigger bulk of the renegades. However, what truly sets them apart from the other renegades is that many of them have been subjects to Waltz experiments. Therefore, some of them have enhanced strength and durability. Almost imagine super soldiers, just weaker and consumed with rage. Overall, the Renegades aren't highly organized, but their numbers and enhanced capabilities do make them a threat. Also, there's a few notable places for their base of operations, but the main one I'll focus on will be the car factory. I mean, they have other places under their control, but they're a bit irrelevant. Now we get to go over Marius Fisher, aka the Baron. Now, of course, every main antagonist has to have ties to the GRE in one way or another, and the Baron is no different. However, there are a few differences, the main one being the Baron used the GRE and pretended to be an ally. He manipulated them through the guise of a partnership. He was the CEO of Fisher Inc. and a psychiatrist. Through his extreme wealth and his mind, he would begin to weaponize the Haran virus. He would hire an army of mercenaries and subjugate the town of Castor Woods. Not long after the fall, the Baron would get a hold of Crane and spend many years experimenting on him. Crane was the catalyst for the Baron's creations, the Chimeras. He would also experiment on various other people, and eventually he would create sentient volatiles. Now, what about his private army? Well, they were very well equipped and organized. I mean, they did manage to basically conquer Castor Woods. However, even though these guys did work for the Baron, it does appear they were aware of how crazy he was. They are also smart enough to not want to die because of the Baron. I guess the best example of this is when his soldiers were attempting to blow up the tunnel was the sentient amalgamation thing. They wanted to get rid of this thing before the Baron found out. You can watch this video for a better understanding. Now, his army is very strong, however, his true strength lies with the Chimeras. With the Red Mist, he could actively guide the Chimeras into attacking his enemies. We saw this in the attack on the town hall. And also, it does appear that he mass-produced some Chimeras for the purpose of weaponizing them. Alrighty, let's begin with Waltz. Whatever experiments he conducted on himself altered his strength significantly, but there does appear to be a sort of weakness. He doesn't appear to fully control his powers. When he takes damage from Lawan, he loses control and the madness of the virus seems to take over him. There was another instance when he did lose control too. However, I figure it's a great payoff for the amount of power he gets. He becomes strong enough to snap the necks of men with a single blow. Now he does have access to inhibitors which significantly increase his strength. He's also able to cause shockwaves and his durability seems to be high enough to shrug off most attacks. The more inhibitors he takes, the further he falls to the virus. In the pinnacle of his strength, he can hurtle stuff at you like a demolisher. Now if he does take enough damage, he reverts back to his human state. The Baron. Well, this guy has no notable superhuman feat apart from his level of intellect. In his human state, he's primarily seen using a grenade launcher. However, when he injects himself with the serum created from all the GSB from Crane's blood, he transforms into a monstrous chimera/sentient volatile. When he transforms, he gains high levels of power, durability, and similar to Waltz, he can cause shockwaves. He is also relentless and not letting up when attacking. I do think what really held back the Baron was the fact that he was weak as a human. Imagine if someone like Aiden, who's already an enhanced person, had taken the serum. The levels of power would have been insurmountable. But sadly, the Baron's transformed state never reached its full power. Near the end of the fight, he attempted to take more of the serum but died before it took effect. Alright, let's consider it for a second. Who would win between the Renegades under Waltz or the mercenary army of the Baron? Well, if I'm being honest, I think the mercenaries have it in the bag. Don't get me wrong, a bunch of these renegades have been experimented and enhanced by Waltz. Are they on the same level of Waltz? No, but they are stronger than your average human. You'd think this would give them an edge, and well it does if it were only 1v1s, but it isn't. It's both groups clashing against each other. The mercenaries were running the Fade with Crane and Aiden, two guys significantly stronger than the renegades. These guys were cooking them for a better part of the story too. The main thing that gives the mercenaries the edge is the fact they behave like an actual army. They are organized working under one leader while the renegades were all scattered around and with many smaller leaders. Not only that, but the guns just give the mercenaries an advantage that not even those enhanced renegades could close. So what if small groups came across each other? Well, the most likely outcome is that the Baron's soldiers would kill those renegades and possibly leave any enhanced individual alive and take that person to the Baron to be experimented on. I do think the Baron would want to get a hold of these people, and you never know. He could replicate or even create a better way and create his own super soldiers. Either way, I don't see a small group of renegades beating a small convoy of the Baron's men. So if a group of renegades loses to a group of mercenaries, what would happen if their entire armies attacked each other? Let's say Waltz, of course before dying, learned about the Baron and his experiments. Seeing all the resources the Baron has, Waltz decides to go and take it all for himself, with the idea that perhaps he could create a cure for Mia. So Waltz takes his army of renegades and traverses the lands until they reach the Baron's castle in Castor Woods. Now obviously this wouldn't happen because it's stupid, but this is the scenario I'm using to justify Waltz attacking the Baron. So what happens? Well, the only true chance Waltz has of winning is if he attacks all at once. A full-on siege, if you will. If he decides to have a long drawn-out fight that lasts weeks or months, then there is a good chance he wouldn't even get near the Baron. However, there would be a tactical side to having a drawn-out war. It would give him the time to kill mercenaries and steal their supplies. If he can get himself some guns, then he could close the gap between their army's strength. On the other hand, he could also just have his men go around and get guns. But choosing either of those methods would only result in the Baron discovering Waltz's presence. Now what do you think? I mean, I could be completely wrong, but I think taking his entire army and attacking at once might be the only way he can get through the castle and its garrison. Other than that, there's a chance the Baron could figure out and weaponize the chimeras, and in which case, most of Waltz's army would be wiped out. And if they wait too long, then the mercenaries could find their base and wipe them out. The Renegades just don't have the firepower to actually defeat the Mercenaries. That's why I think the element of surprise in launching a full-on attack might be the only way they have of winning. Of course, they could choose to launch various incursions, but they are fighting the Baron, and with his genius that could possibly be a stupid plan. Now of course, if Waltz waltzes right in, then him and his army would be blasted to oblivion. They would have to be smart and cause a diversion while a smaller team finds a way to break in. Overall, I don't see Waltz winning. The Baron's army just has the range. I mean, if the Renegades can close the gap, they might have a chance of piercing through the castle defenses, but I don't think the Renegades would have a good time at all. And now let's see what if the Baron attacked the Villador. Let's say he decided he needed some new test subjects, the enhanced Renegades. So for this scenario, let's say the Baron mobilized a force and went to Villador with the hopes of capturing Waltz or those enhanced by him. Of course, this would happen all before the events of Dying Light 2. What chance do the Renegades have? Well, honestly, I see a bunch of the Renegades getting wiped out. They are just too scattered, and without any proper organization, they wouldn't be able to fend off the soldiers. Luckily for them, the Peacekeepers would more than likely join the fight. They would probably see the Mercenaries as an invading army and launch a counterattack. But just like the Renegades, without those guns, they don't stand much of a chance. And then there could also be the chance the Peacekeepers team up with the Mercenaries to wipe out the Renegades. But for this video, let's say they don't. Well, after a while of fighting, I do think Waltz would give the call to arms. And whatever Renegades remained, they would form a disgruntled army. They do have the home advantage and could use it to launch various incursions to the mercenary army. They do have their makeshift cannons and bows, so they aren't necessarily defenseless. The fact that at first the Renegades would be scattered means the Baron's army wouldn't be able to wipe them out in one singular blow, which means they would have time to group up. I do think the Renegades in this instance would have a better time fending off an attack from the Mercenaries. With the Baron, all they gotta do is attack the castle and kill him. With Waltz, well, he's typically wherever he wants to be. Finding and capturing him would be difficult. Now, would the Renegades lose? Possibly, but it would be a slaughter on both sides. Or at least I think it could be. Let's say all the Renegades gathered in one place like the car factory. Well, if that happened and the mercenary army learned of this place, then that would possibly be a bloodbath for the Renegades. And you also gotta keep in mind all they want to do is capture some experimented people, so they don't have to necessarily kill all the Renegades. Overall, I do think the Renegades lose. Even though they have those enhanced people, it just isn't going to do much against guns. Now for the fight everybody has been waiting for, Waltz versus the Baron, and the verdict, Waltz loses. I mean, I'm pretty sure most people saw this coming. I mean, each one has their own strengths and weaknesses, but I think the gap between their powers is too significant, at least for lore purposes. Okay, we have to see it this way. Aiden in his beast state beat Waltz in his full power. Then a much stronger Aiden proceeds to get beaten up by a Crane that has been boosted by 8 different GSB. Then Crane gets captured and a new serum is created from his blood containing all the GSB acquired so far. And then the Baron proceeds to inject himself with said serum. Now are you starting to get it? The power boost the Baron got in his Chimera form would have given him way more than enough strength to beat Waltz. Now I do think Waltz still has some areas where he is stronger. For starters, he could possibly run faster and jump much further than the Baron can. Which I mean, it could give the Baron a bit of trouble since that sneaky little bastard would be slippery. But when it comes to strength, I don't think Waltz can win. If it's human Waltz versus Marius, then Waltz would make Kentucky Fried Chicken out of him. But let's not kid ourselves, the Baron would most definitely take the serum. The only way Waltz wins is by either killing the Baron before transforming or injecting himself with the same serum, but that doesn't count as his own power, so we can't even consider it. But yeah, I believe a full power Waltz cannot be a transformed sentient volatile Chimera Baron. Overall, the Baron and his army would more than likely beat Waltz and his Renegades. At first glance, the enhanced renegades could give the Baron trouble, but once you realize that the Baron could use the red mist to use the chimeras as weapons, well, at that point, Waltz and his men can't really do much of anything. But what do you think? Do you think differently? If you do, please let us know in the comments. I appreciate your time. Like, sub, or don't as long as you enjoyed the video. Goodbye.